Hey guys, and welcome to how to paint the Shang Ji Invincibles of the Jing faction from Corvus, Belli's Infinity. I hope I got all that correct. Sorry if I butchered that. So yeah, I think these are the Shang Ji Invincibles, but I'm not totally sure. This is the first time I'm painting Infinity models, and I'm pretty excited. They look awesome. So these models came out about a month ago, I think, and yeah, just they looked awesome, and I haven't painted metal miniatures in so long, so I thought, hey, what the hell, let's have a go at these. It should be a lot of fun, and I'm looking to do a custom scheme on this, so today you'll see me do that. Yeah, it should be pretty cool. So if we have a look at the box here, we'll move the miniature out the way. You can see that the artists have done, we'll get that out of the way there. So you can see the artists have done like a really beautiful yellow scheme, but today we're going to be doing a blue-green scheme, because I love those colors, and more specifically a recipe that I use on my own Death Guard models from Warhammer 40k. So but we're going to push it more towards the greens, so all of those areas that are yellow are going to be done in that color, and you can see that the painter here has chosen a lot of neutral grays for the highlighting, which I tend to do a lot. This is a great complementary color for your main pop color, in this case the yellow, but we're going to be doing the green. So if we have a look at some examples of my Death Guard here, so we've got this one, which is the scheme, which is more in the blue tone, okay? But what we're going to go for instead of this is we're going to go and push it more towards the greens. It's a bit hard to tell on this footage, but this is a little bit more of a limey green tone. It looks blue on this footage, but it's actually a bit more green. So we're going to use the recipe but go more towards this sort of color. Maybe if we put them side by side, you might be able to tell. Nah, you can't really tell. This one's just a bit more green, but that's what we're going to do. So if you can imagine on this model, all of those armored areas are going to have this blue-green on it, and then with the blacks, the neutral blacks. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. It's also going to come out a little bit darker and richer on this model because we're going from a black base. My Death Guard usually go from a zenithal, so which is a lighter base for that one. So it should be really interesting. It's going to be a lot of fun. I hope you enjoy this. At the end will be an overview with a close-up picture, but yeah, I guess let's get into it. Okay, so to begin with, I started out by putting the base layer of highlights on the blacks, and then realized that there's so much detail on this model that you really need to block out the colors first. So I stopped there after highlighting the Necromancer cloak, and then went back and begun mixing my base blue-green for the armor. So that was mixing those two together and making that base color, and then blocking out all the areas that are going to be that blue-green. So that's going to be our shade, which is tinted more towards the green. So I did that just to map it out first before we go back and highlight the blacks, so focusing more on the armor. So once I'd done that, as you're seeing me do, then I came in and begun blocking out the brass, and picking out some areas because I felt like it needed some of that sort of brightness from true metallics, and as I did that, I then decided that metals would be good too. So I then went through and picked out some little areas on the model just to add a few little bright spots of metals, just to break up the matte colors and so on, because otherwise this model can be a little bit, I guess, not necessarily boring, but just like too sort of matte color style. I want to get a bit more range in terms of specularity. So once that's all done, then it came into shading that armor. So I'm blending in those blue greens mixed with a little bit of the Toxic Mist, the light blue, just to bring in a little bit lighter shade of that blue in there into the green, and I begin just feathering that over the surface, leaving some of the darker shade down the bottom of the armor panels, as you're seeing me do here, and just building up that tonal range across each of the armor panels, and sort of focusing the light towards the top of each of those panels, but not always. Sometimes just doing it for what looks cool, right? So once that's done, we're then going to move into the highlighting of each of those panels. So in that stage, now we're going to bring in the Kraken skin, that light fluoro green color, and build up a set of highlights which are now shifting towards towards the green. So we're going from blue all the way up to this bright green, and that's a really like interesting thing to try. So you're just building that up, adding that Kraken skin into that mix, and then line edge highlighting around each of those panels, and you'll see me do that, just building that in. And putting it where it feels good, like not always focusing on how natural light would hit it, but just line edging it to the point where it feels right for that panel. So, you know, in some cases maybe going all the way around and underneath as well. Just making those aesthetic decisions for yourself and building that in. And then as we move through that, we're going to now do the final highlight, and this one is more towards the top, so it's almost pure Kraken green. It's you know, just a little bit tinted, and we're only doing the very tops of everything. This is where the light source thing comes in, so that we're getting that fade from green to blue, even in the line edge highlights, which is another layer of fading that we're doing. And again, it's not necessarily going to always be about true light source. We're looking more towards a gradient of color across the surface, so we get an interesting look, and that's what we're going for. And then finally, to draw your attention to the face and around that top area, you'll see me then mix in some white into that mix, and then just put some little spot highlights around the helmet and around the top of the shoulder and the chest plate, just to really give that central area a little bit more brightness, and prepare us for when we do our glaze over the top, so that we still maintain some brightness around the focal point of the model, and that should give us a really great result. And so we're halfway through the process, so let's take a look. So yeah, this is a really great stage to be at. So we're seeing all of the colors there. You know, they're looking great, and you could stop right there if you really wanted to, but I want to go a little bit further and build a little bit of shine in this armor, because it's still a bit matte, and I want to see a little bit more yeah, a little bit more material quality there. So we're going to use a very transparent glaze of contrast paint, and we're going to be using a slightly green tone, this turquoise one. Okay, mixed with some of the contrast medium. Now the medium will give it a low sheen, a shine, because it's got a gloss in it. So, but we're going to be very careful and make sure that it doesn't tint it too much. Whenever you're doing glazes, it always drops the value of what you put it on, which means it's going to darken it. So we want to make sure that's very light, just enough to enrich the color and give it a little bit of a shine, and deepen all those tones in there. So that'll be really cool. So that'll be the next step, and then once we've done that, we'll move into all of the little metallics, and then the black line edge highlighting, and also we're going to do some of these little panels here, like on the bicep there and so on, and some of these ones on the calf. We're going to do the same thing with the black highlights, and we're going to tint it with this one that says green, but it's actually a blue, and we're going to give a light glaze to some of those areas as well. So we'll have some armor that is a sort of low sheen blue tinted highlighted area, and then we'll have in the inner areas, this mesh, it'll be that neutral blacks, and then obviously on the gun as well, neutral blacks. So you'll get 3 different tonal ranges of qualities of light hitting those surfaces, as well as even then the 4th one will be the metallics. So we get a nice combination of the way light hits this model, and it's going to make it very satisfying. And then obviously the base at the end, which I'll be going for grays, that sort of thing. This is that sci-fi model, so we want to keep it within that kind of spectrum, so that should be really cool. So let's get started. Okay, so the first steps are the turquoise glaze, and so what you really want to do is get that contrast medium and only mix a very small amount of the turquoise in, so it's very transparent. And then what we're going to do is we just glaze it over that armor, and you'll see me doing it, and it's just tinting it slightly, but what we're really getting out of it is a low sheen, which you'll see it now picks off the real light that's in the room, my spotlights and so on. You'll see these little tiny glints of light, and that's what we're looking for. And so once we've done all that and we let that dry, we move on to the brown and black ink washes, the sepia wash and the Noan oil on all of the metal areas, and just build up a bit of shading around those as well, so that they sort of start to come alive, and that'll give them a bit more grit as well. And so then as you move through that, you're then going to come into the highlighting. So you'll see me do it. I use the silver there and start highlighting all the little metal areas on, like the gun, the gun barrel, the little cables that are on the body that are connected to the little brass fittings and so on. And for the brass areas, I'll mix in that silver into the brass, and you'll see me highlight those areas so that we get a bit of difference. So it's not straight silver on that brass sections, it's got a little bit of tint of the color in it. And then once all that's kind of sorted out and everything is dry, then we move on to highlighting that black finally. So we already have the base layer of that grey down, the necromancer cloak. So now we're building up through those tones, the mid-tone up to the light, and just building up those highlights, hitting successively less of those edges as you go up, just like we did the normal armor. So we're building in all of that gradient of color up onto the tops of all of those armor panels that are going to be or everywhere that's going to be black, basically. So we're just building all of that up, and in the end you'll see me just doing a little spot highlight on the key areas around the face and the armored areas around there with a little bit of white mixed in, and that gives us like a final pop around that area and prepares us for our blue glaze that we're going to do, which we're going to do in exactly the same way as the turquoise armor, but now we're using that bluish toned contrast paint, and we're going to mix in our contrast medium and give us our nice clean clear glaze, and just glaze over those armored areas, not everywhere, just the armor panels on the bottom of the stomach there, on the biceps and so on, the back of the leg, but not all of the gauze areas. We'll leave them a matte gray. And then once all that's done and while it's drying, we move on to I just chose a red for the scabbard and other little details like the eyes and so on. We're just building in a little bit of redness in there, but not too bright, so I've used blue to darken it down and just build it up with some orange highlights. And so that'll give us our little tiny spot color, but not too garish to take away from the focal point of the model. So once you've sort of got all that down and we're sort of moving along, it should basically be done. And so the final thing really is the base. And for the base, I opted for just a nice dark grey, so it doesn't contrast too heavily with the model. So I started with the necromancer cloak, painting it out, and then dry brushing up through the greys up to like an off-white on the edges of all of the as you dry brush up on the edges of all the gravel, and then finally using some sepia brown ink and the green ink mixed with water, just dabbing it around to give you some sort of modulation of color into that grit and into the gravel, so it's not just like one plain grey and has a bit of life to it. And really, once you've done all that, you should end up with a finished model. The only other thing I did was just put a few little spots of white into the eyes and on the gem on his hand, but apart from that, everything should be done. And there we go, one finished Infinity model. I won't say the name again because it's too it's too much of a mouthful, but yeah, one of these Invincibles is all done in a custom scheme. So yeah, I'm really happy with this. It's such a cool thing to be painting a metal miniature again. It reminds me of when I was a kid and everything was metal. You know, it's just been a lot of fun. It's the first sort of non-Warhammer model I've painted in I don't know how long, just so long, and it's been a real pleasure to paint this in a color scheme that, you know, I love, blue greens. So I hope you've enjoyed it, hope you got something out of it, and if you are painting Infinity models, maybe this will give you some ideas for your own stuff. And if you're not and you're into Warhammer, this would make a great Tau color scheme if you're thinking of doing Tau or Eldar or something like that. These kind of blue greens work really well for them. So yeah, you can see, as you can see there now that the contrast is dry, see how my spotlights are just giving you little specular highlights on that helmet. See that, those little ones as I turn it, and on the shoulder pad there and the chest. So you're just getting a lot of free you know, information there material wise. So the whole thing has like matte surfaces, shiny surfaces, all different types, all mixed together, which really makes the model interesting to look at, even though it's only got a small selection of colors. So it's a little trick that I do with a lot of these limited palettes to help you know, liven it up and make it interesting. So yeah, hope you've enjoyed it. I really have. I'll leave you an overview and a close-up picture of this so you can see the real color, because it's a little bit blown out here, as I always say. Unfortunately, I don't have the best setup, so you can't really see the depth of this color. It's a lot greener and a lot deeper in color than what you're seeing here, even though on the video it looks kind of cool, but it's actually a little bit greener than what you're seeing. And the red obviously contrasts against that, so you get like a nice bit of contrast, but it's a bit dull, so it doesn't draw your eye away from the focal point. But yeah, otherwise that's pretty much it. So I hope you've enjoyed this. Please hit that like button, subscribe button if you have, and I'll catch you on the next one.